Hello and welcome to 7AAVDM59 data collection and analysis. Now this course is not going to be online. It's not usually going to have online lectures. I'm doing this lecture online this week only because of a problem with the way that the course has been timetabled. Basically, the problem is you need to attend the lectures before the seminars, but some students have their seminar scheduled for before the lecture. I wasn't sure what to do about that. There's nothing we can do about the timetable. So the best solution I've been able to come up with is this first week I'm going to put the lecture online, which is this one, and in subsequent weeks the lecture that I deliver will in fact be the lecture for the next week's content, and that means that all students, even those who have the seminar on Monday, will be able to attend the lecture before they attend the seminar. Now this lecture is here just to do two things really. One is to introduce the module, to give you an idea of what sort of a module this is, and the other is to run over some of the concepts that were introduced in the readings for this week, which I hope you've done by the time you get to this video, and if you haven't, I would suggest you go off and do them now. They're not very onerous, and then come back and finish watching the video. As a general rule, I will want you to have done the readings before you attend the lecture. In fact, I would expect that, because I don't want to spend too much time explaining things in the lecture, so I'm going to assume each week in the lecture that you have actually done the reading. Okay, well, let's get started. So the first half of this module is going to be devoted to research, well, initially research questions and types of data. That's what we'll be talking about today and in this week's seminars. Then we're going to look at collecting data for 2 weeks. First, we're going to look at questionnaires, and then we're going to look at code books for observational research and content analysis. We are not going to be doing things like data scraping. There are other modules where you get an opportunity to do that kind of thing. If anyone's interested in data scraping, I can of course help with that. It's one of the things that I do in my own research practice. Sorry about that ping. I should have switched off Outlook before I started recording this lecture. But it's not, people jump too quickly to that. One of the things, I first came into quantitative research from data scraping. That was the first thing I did actually. And then I discovered the older forms of data collection, such as questionnaires and content analysis, etc. And I realized that actually they provide richer data. There's a lot of publicity for big data kind of work. There's a lot of publicity for online data collection, this sort of analytics. The same principles apply to that as they do to the sort of data we'll be talking about mostly on this course. But actually, these older forms of data collection actually provide much richer data, which is why questionnaire surveys, for example, have not disappeared in the modern age. You know, when governments, for example, want to find out what the population thinks about something, they don't just scrape Twitter. In fact, they are barely interested in that. They are much more likely to commission a survey because that is a better way of finding out what people think. Data scraping has its place, and of course I believe that because I still do it. It's not something I did in the beginning and gave up on. It's something which it's something which I've continued to do throughout my work, but now I see it as augmented by other forms of data collection which provide smaller but richer data, and that is what we're mostly going to be focusing on this course. Although I see if I can bring in some sort of scraped data at some point, so you can get a chance to look at the kind of purely digital data that many people come to digital humanities with an expectation of working on. When we've gone through that, we're going to look at survey design and experiment design. Experiments remain one of the most important ways of finding out about the world, and actually there are specific ways of carrying out experiments online. For example, experiments are routinely carried out in the tech industry, for example, in the web industry. If you've ever heard of A/B site testing, that is a form of experiment. It follows exactly the experimental principles that were laid out decades ago by the great Ronald Fisher, who we'll be talking about later in the course. So, I mean, that's just another example of how the kinds of work that people do now. A lot of so-called machine learning is using basic statistical techniques which have been developed for working on things like questionnaire data over decades. Okay, so if you're surprised to see things like this on the course, don't be. Apart from the fact that you shouldn't be, because they're in the course description. These kinds of data collection, they are still relevant. They in many ways they underpin and augment the more modern seeming kinds of data collection, which we'll also talk about, although to a lesser extent. And they are still absolutely vital for all kinds of research practice, both in the academic sphere where I work, or in the policy sphere in which I also work, and indeed in the commercial sector where I have many good friends and contacts. So this is not what you're going to learn on this course. It's not something for the ivory tower. This is this is a useful form of knowledge which can be used in order to gather knowledge about other topics, and that's vital across the whole sphere of human activity. But let's move on to the next part of the course. So then we come to the second half of the module. Now, you may be looking at this and seeing week after week which says analysis and thinking, well, wasn't the whole module supposed to be about analysis? Why have we only got to it in the second half? Why have we got to wait that long? Well, in fact, everything in this second half of the module is underpinned by what was in the first half of the module. There's two reasons why we had to first look at data collection, survey design, experiment design. The first is that the assessment on this module relies on you being able to collect data as well as analyze it. So we had to cover it for that reason. The second reason is that you need to understand, even if somebody else has collected data, you need to understand how it was collected in order to be able to analyze it meaningfully. In fact, I would even say that if you come across some data and you don't know how it was collected, it's not really data. It might be data in the sense that anything transmitted over the internet is technically data, but it's not data for research purposes. Unless you know how it was collected, I don't even know what to call it. Okay, your analysis of the data rests on your having an understanding of how that data came into existence. Otherwise, you're just playing around with numbers. So it is absolutely vital that you can understand that. But there's a third reason, which is that in fact, some of the most vital questions which we are going to come across in week 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are underpinned by a basic understanding of probability. And probability is a topic which will be introduced when we are talking about experiment design, and which will be introduced when we're talking about survey design. So really, probability is fundamental to statistics. Statistics is what we are doing here. That will have been introduced in the first half of the course. It will underpin everything here. You'll see why. Now, the four weeks that we're going to be spending looking at different kinds of analysis. The first of those, which is week 6, we will look at counts of categorical variables. The second of those, which is week 7, we'll look at distributions of numeric variables. Then we'll move on to correlation and regression with numeric variables. Those of you, well, you may have come across these. You may have come. I don't teach 7AAVDM59, so I'm not sure if it's still in there. I did teach correlation as part of that module when I still taught it. I don't know if it's still there. If not, we're learning it again here, and we're moving on. We're moving on from correlation to regression. Some of you may have heard of that. That is, in many ways, it is the most fundamental form of it's fundamental, for example, to many forms of machine learning, so-called. It's one of the most important techniques that's used in analysis of survey data, for example. It's used regression. It's fundamental to so many things. I can't go through them now. We'll be first looking at correlation and regression with numeric variables, because that's the technique was worked out like that in its most basic and fundamental form. That's they are both adapted to numeric variables. When we move on to the next week, though, we'll see how they can be made to work with categorical variables as well, and that builds on the knowledge you'll have picked up the previous week. And then finally, we'll be looking at questions of ethics and errors, which are, of course, fundamental to anything we do in research. So today's lecture is going to go through 4 preliminary questions. What is quantitative research? Why do you need to know about it? What exactly are you going to learn? Why am I the person to teach it to you? Expectations, assessment, research questions, and data.